but you do need a plan within all of this. The part of the branding is creating strategy around everything, and that doesn't mean creating lots of big documents. Strategic thinking is just thinking about what you're trying to achieve longer term, and then almost creating those steps backwards to meet that. So it's a plan, which I think quite often as creatives, plans fall by the wayside, and people focus so much on the creative and making and designing, or the sort of creative part of it. And very often, a lot of the mentoring I do is helping people to think about the other areas of business, and to kind of make sure that it's a very solidified and full packaged offering what you're doing. It doesn't mean as a small business, you do often have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades, because quite often people are doing it themselves on their own, and you end up having to learn skills that you never imagined that you would need to be doing whilst doing the bit that you love and the fun creative bit. But I think that through having an understanding, even depending on your stage as you grow, even if you don't down the line do the communications or deal with all the branding, having an understanding of a lot of the areas will really help you as a small business, and help you to think about all the different stages rather than just creating a product or a service and trying to get it out there. It's thinking about the customer, thinking about the brand and the strengthening of that, thinking about sort of marketing, all of the areas together. You will be able to think a little bit more rounded. So as an agency, we do a mixture of branding, marketing, PR. We do a lot of mentoring and business coaching. We run various programs and workshops, and then we have the representation side where we look after, I don't know, I've got a drag queen called Virgin X. I've got a trans makeup artist called Joseph Harwood. I've got Clara Rolling Funky, who is a wheelchair using black model and influencer. So lots and lots of amazing people that have really strong messages. And it's just become very fortuitous with what I've always done, that actually now people give a bit of a shit about inclusivity and the other areas. So it's a big part of what we do. And I think especially in a pandemic and as the world's evolved, it's become much more of a focus more widely within industry and business. So it's again, I won't talk about that side of things too much, but certainly if you have any questions around it relating to the branding in your business, then happy to answer that. As Amanda said, just any questions, then this is your time with me on this topic. I was going to say ask me anything. There might be some boundaries to that, but ask any questions that are going to help you. You've got me for this next period of time. We've got the series that we're running, and they will follow on, because for me and for what we do, I can teach you the skills and the techniques around any of these topics. But one of the big things is about mindset. And actually the next one next week, we're going to talk more about mindset and mindset changing, and also looking more as we go. And then the following one about how to be agile and strengthened during the pandemic and this changing time. But it is all about mindset. And to be honest with you, if you don't get anything else out of this session today, apart from it's making you think a bit differently and it's changing your mindset a little bit, then you've got as much as I wanted you to get out of it. And then if you get any more than that, then it's brilliant, because branding is about mindset. And like I say, you can learn techniques. You can go on Google to learn elements of some types of branding, but the way that I like to teach it and work within it is it's about mindset. Even when we work with a client and do a big branding project, we would never take it away, do a project and hand it back. They have to be on the journey with us, because otherwise they've not changed their mindset to think in a brand orientated way. So even if it just makes you think, then you've really got enough out of it. And I think especially where we're at, just this little period after Christmas, and with all the challenges we've got, it's about feeding your mind little and often and making those changes and going through a process. So what I talked to you today about, welcome to do screenshots. The slides won't be available afterwards, but you're welcome to screenshot, make notes. And I think that it's going to be available on YouTube afterwards. But some of this you can read again afterwards if you take shots of it. But just try to absorb and sort of get into your head a little bit on this, because it will help you as far as how you think about what you're doing. And like I say, as much as I can, I'm here to guide you through it. It is, like I say, it is a process. So this is just a flash. People think that branding is about a logo. It's not. That's just your mark. That's the graphics around it. That's just the mark that supports your branding, but just a little flash up there. So it's about perception. You know, it's really what people say about you when you're not in the room. It's about a feeling. It's about an experience. It's what it feels like. So yes, what your brand looks like is important, because that backs up the branding work and the values and stuff that we're going to talk about. That's just the visual representation of your brand. What a brand actually is about perception, feelings, experiences. It's about things feel like, think like, speak like, and how you talk. It's everything to do with what you put out there in the world about your brand. So often, and this has been over my whole time, 25 years I've been working in fashion, people, and especially fashion or within a product-based industry, they have an idea, they create something, they then make it, spend all their money on making it, they then think that they need to get it out to the world, so they jump onto PR and pay for PR, and then miss this whole branding section out. And what they create is products, and you sell products. And really, what you need to be doing is selling your brand, sell the world of what you do, not just the products. Don't talk about the skirts or the dresses or the jewelry that you make. Talk about what your brand feels like, because that's what's going to connect with your audience. You know, if they want a skirt, there's lots of different places they can go to find a skirt or a dress. You're competing on a massive market. But if you create a brand which has a feeling, and you find the audience and understand that audience really well, then the two things together, that's where the magic happens. It's the world of your brand that you want to think about creating. And obviously social media becomes a big tool for that, not the only tool, but at the moment especially, it's a really big tool to use. But you, even within your social media, which we're not necessarily talking about that too much in this series, but it's that whole communication of what you do. Don't put loads of products up and just start selling. Why are people not buying what I'm doing? They want to connect with, they want to align with your values, which we're going to talk about. And really, it's building credibility, and the coming together of all of these different identities and marks and methodology, and the services. So it's about differentiating yourself, which in this world where we are now, even more so, you know, if you are in that athleisure, fitnessy world, or if you're in the well-being zone of what you're doing on any level, then you're even more competing on a massive platform. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea, but on any level, or any business, and certainly creative businesses, you are trying to compete on a sort of wide scale. It does give focus to what you're doing, and actually once you set your values and the underpinning of your brand and business, it really helps decision making. You know, I say it from a styling perspective, when you start giving people colors that suit them or shapes that suit them, it's like, oh, that makes it more full on and scary. No, actually it doesn't. When you go in a shop, you now know you don't look at that wall, you don't look at that wall, you just look at that. It makes it very focused. And it's the same with this. When you know who you are internally, it makes decision making very easy. So whether you're deciding, do I use that image for a campaign or that one, if you keep going back to your values and the underpinning of your business, it makes decisions really, really easy. and even relating to collaborations that you should enter into, or partnerships, or whether or not you should be involved in an event, whether you should use that model, this model. If you just keep going back to your values and that underpinning, it's like your Bible. When we do branding for clients and we do a whole brand Bible for them, it is literally that. It becomes a guide and a kind of a checklist. So whether you've got a website person that's working with you, it becomes a guide that you give them, you know, whether it's sort of your values and the spirit and what it looks like. It becomes a part of the guide that anyone that does anything with you, if you employ staff, it becomes a part of that rhetoric that they know, you know, that it gives less opportunity for mistakes or for miscommunication when you get some of this right. It's obviously a really good way to communicate your message, and you know, and further develop the business and brand. You know, people always think that branding as a sort of business within business is just for big companies, and it's really not. It's for, even as an individual or creative, if you're a freelance graphic designer or stylist or photographer or fitness trainer, it's still something that you should be thinking about and a way that you should be thinking. We do quite a lot of personal branding for people, and it's the more, even as an individual, you think like a brand, it means that companies or anyone that you want to interact with you, it becomes more of a synergy, and again, it becomes an extension of your world, but it also becomes very easy for people to understand whether or not they should be connecting with you, and again, whether it's that alignment. Now, all this said, not all big brands are brilliant at branding and do the work they should be. And actually, maybe the more you sort of learn, or if you come on this series, you might start to identify that as well. They're not all brilliant at branding, and they don't all put the time and effort into it as they perhaps should. And actually, you know, you might think about brands that you connect with on a personal level and why you connect with them. And I think even more so now, it's not just that you like the sweatpants or the earrings they make, that you physically like. You connect with the brand on some level, you know, whether you align with their ethics around sustainability, or whether you feel like you connect with them on a level. It's not just about you engaging with that product. For those that are setting up, it is a brilliant time to think about branding, because you are starting with that, with the foundations and the underpinning. But it's not too late once you've started. And again, we do this for businesses, you know, that have been going a long time. I mean, I did quite a big project for a glasses brand that had been going 10 years. So you can go back in and do the work and then strengthen. So it is not a problem if you've been going 5 years, 10 years. It's never too late to think like a brand and to do this work. You know, it's okay. You just approach it very slightly differently, because you've already got the information. You've already got some information about your customer. You've got some information about the world that you're inhabiting and the industry that you're trying to engage with. And you know, positioning is really important, whether you are trying to set yourself up as whatever, a middle of the, you know, sort of mid-markets, I don't know, t-shirt brand or whatever, to understand who you are and who sits near you positioning wise helps you to understand sort of everything, really, from pricing to customers to everything. We work, and this is maybe getting, well, when we do I'm talking to you today within the process so that you understand, and this is how we go through it. So it really helps you to do this like a brand, but we work on a brand key. And it all comes back to this big idea, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's going through this stage by stage so that you understand, even if you know, you might think you know what your benefits are, you might think you know about your customer, you might think you know about many of these areas. It's really good to do this anyway, every now and then, to ask these questions. And I'm a strong believer, and within my business and way that we work in general, is ask good questions and you get good answers. And I think that boils down, that goes for everything. You know, today You know, don't, it's people always say, don't ask something you can get answered on Google. Ask a good question that you're going to get an answer to, that's really going to help you and help your growth and understanding of something. And that goes for customers too. You know, people don't ask their customers enough questions. They make presumptions and assumptions. And I think in general, it's, you know, gaining more understanding about all of the areas is super important. So root strength is just when you strip it all back, what is it that makes you great? You know, not just, oh, I make really nice skirt shapes, or I make really, you know, what is it that makes you great? What got you there in the first place? If you're setting up, what do you want that to be? You know, what is it within your skill set that you're bringing to it that creates that, you know, root strength? And it's and, you know, what is it that you do better than anyone else? Because really you need there needs to be something there, because otherwise why? You know, why is someone coming to you? And if you can't answer that, and or if there's not an answer, then you do really need to go back to your kind of basic sort of I guess business proposition, because if you're not offering anything else or giving anyone a reason to come to you rather than anyone else, then it makes it very difficult to market yourself and push yourself out in the industry. So as I said, positioning is about where you sit overall within the market and within trends. And I don't mean fashion trends, but sort of trends within what's going on. And the competitive market is not just other brands. It's also, you know, sort of micro and macro view. You know, there's things you can control and things you can't control, but you do need to understand how that has an impact on you. Obviously, there's shitloads this year that we've not been able to control, that we're all having to react to. But then actually, you know, within your strengths, it's understanding how you've been able to react to that, and how you've how you've handled the sort of hand we've been dealt this year, and how you've been able to evolve and maybe pivot even within what you're doing is, you know, becomes a strength, but it's also sort of part of that macro sort of environment that we have to be mindful of. The customers and audience, I mean, I say audience as well, because even within social, it's an audience as well as being a customer base. Ideally, they're all customers, but quite often, you know, we have an audience, and then it's about how we sort of convert all of them to customers. And how do they speak, and how do they think? And again, this is maybe not fully in this series. It might be something that we look at doing again after this is another, but it's one of the second biggest areas within your business is branding, but then customer. And it's the two areas that people don't spend enough time on. You know, understanding not just where do they shop. You know, I remember when I studied fashion marketing over 25 years ago, it was in the day of Sears being the big group, and it was very much, her name's Jenny, she's this, she goes there, she does that, and it was very much that old style sort of customer profiling. That's not the case now, and for the way that we work in it generally, it's much more important to understand how they feel, how they speak, what they give a shit about, what's their values, to find customers that align with your values, because that's really where the magic happens. You find a customer that shares your values, and then it's about how you help them to understand the benefit in what you're doing, so that they sort of connect and then convert and become customers. The values is what you believe in, what do you stand for, and this is the brand and not you personally. If you're a single sort of one-man band kind of designer maker business and don't have big teams at the moment, or even don't have small teams, it's not you, it's your brand. So focus on the brand and business that you have, and it's not about it being personal, but it determines all the choices that you make. It determines how you act, what you believe in, what you align with. Brand alignment, even if it's not for collaborations, who you put yourself next to, or sort of, you know, even link with in general, it has to be about shared values, because otherwise it's not authentic. And even though authenticity is a word that has been used for a long time, even more so in the world that we're in at the moment, it's even more important. People are just not into bullshit. Not that they were before, but you really can't get away with any bullshit anymore, because people just don't have time for it. they have gone back to their real, or some not back to, they've found much more of their sort of their true selves, I guess, on a way, and values, because people are realizing life's a bit too short. So understanding the values of your customer base is super important. The benefits, so that's both emotional and functional. So the practical benefits of what you do, excuse me, and the emotional benefits of, maybe it's how it's going to make them feel. It might be that you are doing whatever, I don't know, clothing for women that have had children or whatever, and it might make some, there's a big element of how it makes you feel, or it might be underwear that's, so the emotional connection as well. The personality and spirit is a really important part of it. Let's not make this all too linear and sort of factual. The personality is that what brings it to life. So when we talk about the world, you've got the values of what you give a shit about, the benefits, you've got the strengths, but then the spirit and personality is what brings it to life. That helps to determine, the language you use, the types of imagery that you use, where you position yourself, that spirit of what you're doing. Then the reasons to believe is the proof. It's almost the proof that you can deliver. So if you are, for example, doing anything to do with sustainability, you can't make promises and not have some level of backing up, because otherwise it becomes very inauthentic. So the reasons to believe is, you might be able to offer a completely 100% sustainable experience for your customers, but then suddenly they find out actually you don't do zero waste, or so you have to think about this from all levels and be consistent. Don't make promises that you can't back up. And these reasons to believe are the bits that you use to back that up. And then the big idea is, when it all boils down to it, what is it that keeps that brand focused? Now, this is something when we go through the process, that there's a whole journey through all of this, which takes quite a long time, can be even months sometimes. And then the big idea sometimes is just 2 or 3 words even, or it might be, create, sell, share, or whatever that might be. It's the big idea. It's the guts. It's the real guts of what you're doing. Excuse me. So branding includes many different sort of layers to a process of what you need to do. This is not your homework. Don't worry. It's not going to be complicated. I'm going to give you a few little tasks. You don't have to do it, but what I'm going to do is give you a couple of little tasks at the end of this session. And if you decide to do it and you decide to come on the next session next week, I will do a bit of a recap to help you. But it's really, even if you don't want to share what you do with the little tasks I'm going to give you, it just is going to help you to think. And it's going to help you to start on that process. I'm not going to sort of tell you that after an hour together today, you're suddenly going to know everything about branding, and you're going to, and that's my job. It would make a bit of a mockery of what I do if that were the case. But what I would like is for it to sow lots of seeds, hopefully gives you a bit of information. But if you decide to do these tasks, it's going to help to start you sort of thinking along the right lines of going along that process. And hopefully, if you come with us on this sort of 4-week journey of going through the process, then it will help you to sort of think. When I do mentoring and business coaching, I do the same. I give homework after each session, and then it means that we're moving along a process. You're actually doing the work, but being guided, and it works really well. But homework sounds like, if I use the word homework, my son, he freaks out. I actually can't use the word. We have to use a different word because he hates it so much. So development, so research, and looking at all the pros and cons. About naming, I mean, people quite often with the naming, though your brand isn't just your name or your mark, your logo, the name is super important. And actually just randomly thinking of a cool name is not really gonna fly, especially now, but generally there needs to be some backing and rationale around it. And especially once you set the values, which really, when we created Slingshot, we didn't name it until after the whole branding process, because it needed to come out of the values, the spirits. It needed to, yeah, I mean, it took a long time. It's not to say it has to take you a long time, but you randomly picking names that sound cool and sound like they might work, it needs to have a bit of backing to it as well. So, you know, if you are doing a rebrand and looking at it even within the brand, the naming side of things, don't worry about that now. That's something that really comes at the very end. And you know, also the industries have changed quite a lot, so it is also something to think about sort of further down the line. You know, design process, the management, measurement. I'm going to flick through because I'm just conscious that I want to get through a little bit more of this, so that we've still got some questioning time. So branding is about building trust. So, you know, once you go through the process of setting your values, you create your messaging, you align with who your customers are, you go through the whole process. It's about building trust. You can do everything beautifully, amazingly. It can look great. It can be a cool name. You've got some good messages. You might have a great campaign. It all sits. But if it doesn't align with your customers and you can't build that trust, then you just have some nice products or a nice service. It's about that trust building. And I'm sure if you think about the brands that you buy into yourself for your own personal side of things, there has to be, there's an element of you trust them, even if it's you're going to trust that it's going to arrive on time, or it's going to be made to a certain level, or you know that the packaging's really nice, or you agree with what they're putting out on their messaging around what they give a shit about, that it feels like you trust them because they align with your own personal values to some degree. So everything you do has to be about not undermining that trust and relationship that you're building, because that can have a massive impact on your business. So, you know, you build the brand and the values and set that underpinning, and then you work out your customer bases and align with them. Then you create all the assets around it. But then your job is about building trust. It's not about selling, because the more trust you build, the more sales you will have. But just shift your mindset from selling to building trust. Just even that wording of, you know, when you're creating a campaign for something, don't think of it as selling. Think about trust building. You will sell much more. It will become about sales, but try not to think from a sales perspective. Try to think of it as trust building. Now, this is a bit more in depth about each of the areas that I talked about. So I'm going to scan slightly through. If you want to take pics, then no problem. But I just want to get through some of this so that I can talk about some of the values, and I'm going to set you the homework, and you can also be asking me a few questions. So it's the nutshell. It's the nuts and bolts. It might be to do with some of the history around it, the origin of your brand, your history that has impact on the brand as owner, whether it is the sort of geographical location, might be, for example, Melton Mowbray pork pies. Part of that is around the location. It might be that you are using fabrics from a certain place, that the origin of some of that, or where you're located, is relevant. The point of difference, so the context that validates and the underpinning of what you're doing. You know, for example, like Charlotte Tilbury, you know, the point of difference is that it has her DNA, and she's a renowned makeup artist, and her profile around the clients that she's had becomes part of her root strengths, and likewise with similar brands. So some of the trends, I mean, obviously one of the big forces that we have going on at the moment is the pandemic, is all of these factors around it. Now, obviously in the beginning, we didn't know quite what impact that was going to have on a long-term basis. But those forces around the world of any of the industries, and, you know, sort of on a smaller and bigger scale, they do become your friend if you engage and understand that and use it. And like I said at the beginning, it is a really brilliant time for small business, and part of your messaging is around that trust, because it's more of a personal experience, around the customers being able to understand your process maybe a bit more because it's a smaller business. Around your root strengths might be your skill set. You might have been a fitness trainer for 20 years, for 10 years, and then you start an athleisure brand. That becomes a part of your root strengths that become a trend within the trends of the macro environment, but you can use that then as a part of your messaging as a strength within your branding. Whether it's the political, economic, obviously the whole focus on sustainability on a more broad sense now becomes a trend that can be used on a wider level. Before it was trying to educate as well as create force around your brand, but now there's much more education around a lot of that and much more focus for people because they are starting to think more about their footprint and the impact they have on the world. So all of that becomes useful trends for you to use. All of those things around the macro environment. And then the micro is the closer to you. So competitors, suppliers, employers, shareholders, if it's like bigger, customers, media. So all of those things, the macro and micro, but this is one thing that I did learn, it was taught in that way 25 years ago, and it's still relevant, is that the impact of the micro and the macro environment on what you're doing and with branding. Your positioning, so whether it is taglines and sort of branding, where you sit, can help to differentiate. I'm going to whiz very slightly quickly through this because I just want to get to the value stuff so that you have more to work on and taking away. In the competitive markets, it depends on what industry you're in, and it might be something you want to even ask any questions about. Quite often in the past, people have said, "Oh, I don't have any competitors because no one else is doing what I'm doing. No one else is making green beads from Africa in this location." And actually, what you need to be asking yourself within the competitive market is, if you, for example, are making jewelry, it's who else are people wearing if they're not wearing yours? Now, they might not have discovered the specific amazing technique that you do and the style that you do, but if they're not buying yours, they're buying something else. And it's not necessarily another brand that does exactly what you do. It's glasses. If I'm not wearing these, who else might I be wearing? These are Cubits. But so if I wasn't going there, where else might I go? It doesn't need to be another pair of exactly these glasses, but think a bit more broadly of if you're selling, for example, loungewear or whatever, it's who else are people buying into if it's not you, or on whatever level. If you're a stylist or if you're a photographer, who are people going to if it's not you? And starting to think, what they might be doing next, and not to use that as a copycat scenario, but it's understanding what else is going on shouldn't help determine your behavior, but it should have an impact on it, whether it's reacting or whether it is using any of that information to align. And you've got various different types of competitors. So direct, alternatives. So they might, for example, if someone is a direct competitor would be, if I'm a popcorn brand, it's another brand of popcorn. If it's alternative, it might be that it's crisps because it's another snack. It might be the sort of a more available spend competitor. It could be a soft drink because I'm going to pick something and it might be one of those things. So it's sort of thinking exactly the same as you, similar area, or if I'm going to spend my money, am I going to spend it on a pair of trainers, or might I buy a book or whatever? It's whatever you can use their money for. Like I say, this is something that can't give too much time on this one, but we will. I can touch on it a bit more maybe on the next couple of sessions, but it's a massive area for understanding, and there's quite a bit of detail that you can go into. But the more you can understand about your customers, the better, because then it means that you're speaking the language, it's supply and demand, you're creating things that they want, you understand their needs. But I think the brilliant thing about social media, and especially even like Instagram lives, stories, you can have a really great communication level with your customers and your audience. You ask questions. Don't be afraid to, if you don't know what they like or what kind of, what shoe style they want this week, or how they've ask them how they're feeling. People like to be engaged with. They like to feel like you give a shit about them, but they also like to think that you are thinking about them. They like to feel valued. And they like to feel like you care. And actually, if they think you're asking those kinds of questions, like, oh God, you know, this brand cares about me and is interested and is going to, so like I say, don't guess, ask good questions, and you will more than often get good answers. Presumptions never work. You might be lucky sometimes, but rarely. Normally it's you know, removing bias, so that you're not projecting on them. Don't make people feel like you're forcing something on them. Make them feel a part of the journey within branding. So some of the touch points for customer experience, within the purchase and post-purchase. If you are screenshotting anything, might be a useful one. And this sort of spans more than just the sort of branding process. I won't go through all of it, but it's, you know, what can impact the sort of the awareness of your brand and afterwards. But this is the full brand experience. So once you've developed all of this, this is then the process that you take the customer on. So I'm going to just whiz through. Actually, I'm going to stop the share for 2 minutes, and I'm just going to find the right tile so that I can go through that properly and go through the values, because I just want you to look at, apologies for this at the moment. Am I talking too fast? Is this lots that you already know? Is it conjuring up questions already? Do you feel like you're on track, or how's everyone feeling right now on what we're at? Is there any, the word homework makes you freak out? Yeah.
I think you sound good. It's good so far. Yeah.
Good. Don't worry about the homework word. I just wanted to pull up the values bit so I'm not flicking through all of it for you. So values, I mean, just as you can even do a show of hands, have people thought within the branding what they do about values so far? I mean, you could even do a thumbs up, you don't have to show your face. Does anyone want to do a reaction icon? And no, it's kind of, I saw a kind of. Anyone want to? Some of you have. Oh yeah, Joanna has. Yeah, I mean, it's there can be a lot of confusion around it of sort of what values are, and also you know, what's oh God, sorry, you know, looking at my, I'm going to stop this 1 second. I do apologise. It's flipped. Blimmin', this flipped about. I apologise for that. Its values are what you care about as a brand, and it is. Let me just grab that back. There we go. Apologies for this technology. I would like to say quite often have my trusty assistant with me doing the slides so that I'm not flipping about, but makes me sound like a bit of a wanker. Oh Jesus, sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm not there we go, and I'll just leave it like that. So they're the root of your business. It is the moral compass. It's the underpinning. So we often talk about the sort of, well, it's the foundations. We very often work on 4 values just because it is literally like the foundations of your building, the building of your business. And you have to think about the wording very carefully, and it's not something you just say, oh yeah, I think that's it. It's something you need to sit on and take a bit of time over. The way that we do it, whether it's through mentoring, whether we're doing a branding project for someone, is that we go through pulling information around your behavior, personality, how you relate to others, what you care about, what's important to you as a business and brand, and brainstorm a load of ideas, put down a load of words. Quite often, quite often some things people put down aren't actually values. They might be more the spirit or personality. And also what I will get people, what I'm going to actually ask you to do as well, is to then look at all the synonyms of it. Now, there's some wording that, for example, empowerment's always a really good one, because people are like, yeah, empowerment, I'm empowering as a brand. But actually, if you look at the meaning of it and the synonyms of the word empowering and empowerment, it's actually really dictatorial and quite negative. So it's not good to have as a value. It might be, though, that there's a word within there that's a better word as a value. When you set the values, you have to be sure that everything you do can be consistent with that. So if you, for example, authenticity as a value, you have to be sure that on every level that you can be authentic in your behavior, in the way you speak, in the imagery you put out there, the campaigns, the products, whatever wording you use. One, it becomes the place for you to keep going back to. It is the underpinning for every decision making, and even now, for me as a business, we still go back to them. And if you're like, should I align with that brand, go back to the values. And if it doesn't align, it's no, or it's yes. It makes it very, very easy. But you really need to be sure, if sustainability is something that is important to you as a brand, for example, as a value, be sure that you can follow that through, or ethical sort of, or consciousness, or you have to just be sure there can't be a place that you slip up and that it doesn't align. That it goes back to everything. So, for example, trustworthy, creative. You have to make sure, if creative is a word that you feel aligned, that can't just be to do with the products that you're creating. It has to be the way you speak. So even when you're communicating with your customers, you need to make sure that the wording you use is creative. Now, that doesn't mean it needs to be like all over the joint, but it just needs to feel a bit more thought out than business-like. So it's less business-like and needs to feel creative. The word like heritage, you might feel like you're a bit of a heritage brand, but you need to make sure, one, whatever you're doing now, but also what you think you might do in the future. Like, don't think about just the present. You need to think, okay, well, if you think that maybe in 5-10 years, you might want to bring out a sister brand to what you're doing, or another line, or another part of the service that you offer, you need to think about that now. So if that not everything's going to be heritage, that you might bring out a diffusion part of what you do, then that's not the right word to have as a value. If customer care is king as a value, then you cannot slip up on that. Everything has to be around that. It gives you a real focus to what you're doing. If professional, for example, is a value, you've got to make sure that everything is about being professional. And defining these values and refining them, or if you're already going, you may have put some values in place. You need to go back on those. It is fine to go back on them, but this is what you do within the branding process first. Looking at the values is one of the first things that I want you to do, but one of the things you need to think about. You can't think about the spirit and personality yet until the values is the first thing to start with. And it helps to differentiate your business, as we've talked about. It helps to create the whole sort of shape of what you're doing. And it is the cornerstone. It quite literally is the cornerstones. If you're working out what to do as far as your website, the values, it needs to keep going back to the values. If it is about being dynamic, for example, then it needs to feel dynamic on all levels, on the tone of voice, on the the imagery, on the wording. Everything has to be going back to that. The best way to start is brainstorming and just putting down a list of words. Start with that. Anything that you think, just even knee-jerk reaction, start with words that you feel are values. Like I say, and then I want you to, then I want you to look at the synonyms for all of those words. So look at all the other variations of those words. You might start off with 10 words That's fine, because you'll quite quickly be chucking words out as you go through this. Look at the synonyms, look on Google, look at the synonyms, look at the wording around it. One, you might find out other words that you think are better, but also it will validate that value. And when you choose those words to begin with in your brainstorming, you need to think about all the areas of your business. Don't just think, yeah, I'm a creative business, I'm, whatever. You need to think about from all levels. So for customer facing, internally, it has to be on all levels. Eventually, I want you to end up with 4 to 6. No, you don't really need any more than those, because otherwise it can become a little bit confusing. Because you will also have the spirit and personality as well. But they need to be strong. This is like literally the underpinning. And it's stuff like, for you, what's a deal breaker? What is there within what you're doing that it's a deal breaker? If it's not about, for you, if it is a customer, if everything you do is about the customer, what is it that that will sort of break it for you? And look at the brand alignment around it. Look at those sort of words around it that to double check on it. Even look at whether these words are used in other industries. Think about your personal values, and see how they relate, and if any of that relates within a business perspective. If it is loyal, being heart-centered. If you're a female business that's for females, maybe it's for mums, for example. If all that you do is about being very heart-centered, then just go backwards and forwards over this, just to double check and make sure. This is our values as a business, just as an example for you, so that you can see sort of where we are. And actually what you can also do as a part of homework is look at this. I'm in the process actually of doing some work on our website, because actually I'm going back to it. Again, this last year's thrown a lot of things up for us. In all different ways, and actually, for me, this year has really reaffirmed the focus on inclusivity and diversity in all that we do. We did a massive series of lives. I now wonder how I did it, but I did 3 lives a week through that first period for weeks and weeks in the first lockdown, with all different experts and creatives, and taught everything. I don't actually know how I did it, actually, because homeschooling was even worse than in the first lockdown. But but for me, I'm in the process of going back over a lot of the early work, not necessarily the values, but some of the other work. And it's something that you keep doing, but just so that you can see, and maybe you can have a look, and actually you can come back to me and say whether you think that you can see that through the social, through our website, and see whether you feel like it makes sense and connects. But being synergistic is really important, because we're very much about collaboration, teamwork, alliance, symbiosis. So these are the meanings and the synonyms underneath it. Being dynamic, everything's kind of quite energetic and kind of quite compelling, and being very focused and strategic. So that's the kind of planning kind of side of things. But then the creativity, it has to come through the wording as well as the look and the feel. And so if you could kind of look over some of that and see whether you feel that that is aligned from our perspective. There is literally a whole load more that I could be going through on branding, but we've got a series of 4, and I'm conscious of wanting to be able to let you to ask some questions, if anyone has any, around what I've talked about, or around your business. If you understand what I'm asking you to do, like I say, you don't have to share it next time, but it will be good for you to do the exercise. And then we can go through some of them at the beginning of next time, or not if you don't want to. But it will help you to get along this process of thinking, if that makes sense and you are all willing. But has anyone got any questions up till now? Has it been useful? Does it make you freak out, or do you think, yeah, I've got this, I'm already doing this, all good?